Welcome to The Pie, a production of the University of Chicago's Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics. I'm your host, Tess Vigeland. Today we've got a special episode for you, a talk by UChicago scholar Pablo Peña about his new book, Human Capital for Humans, followed by a Q&A we did on stage last month at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures. Peña is an associate instructional professor in economics and the college in the Kenneth C. Griffith Department of Economics. UChicago economist Gary Becker won the Nobel Prize largely for his advancement of human capital theory, the idea that investing in a person's knowledge and skills has a wide range of economic effects. Becker's writing on the subject was technical, but his teaching, especially in his famous doctoral course, remains legendary for its accessibility and applications to everyday life. In Human Capital for Humans, Peña, a former Becker student, channels this classroom approach to produce an essential guide to understanding the science that has become synonymous with modern life and the economy. So here we begin with Peña's book talk, and then we'll move into my interview with him on the UChicago campus.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ben, for the kind introduction. And thanks to the team at the Becker-Friedman Institute for organizing such a nice event in such a beautiful venue. Thank you all for being here. I see this as a celebration of economics and of the distinctive Chicago approach. Ben was getting ahead of me. I was going to say that economics was born from two strands of thought that we might call the philosophical and the mundane. One is concerned with deep questions, such as the conception of society, while the other is occupied with practical problems like the effects of tariffs on national income. There's one particular field of economic analysis that falls right in the middle between the philosophical and the mundane: human capital theory. Why do we marry? Why do we have children? Should we go to college or grad school? Should I look for a different job? Should I save more for old age? Should I drink less and exercise more to live longer? Gary Becker, one of the greatest economists of all time, and both a student and a professor here, provided a framework to analyze those and many other questions of prime interest to human beings. At its core, his theory relies on an incredibly simple idea. People's behavior responds to prices, and prices respond to people's behavior. But in this approach, prices should be broadly understood. When we marry, we pay a price, but not necessarily in cash. We give up alternatives. Babies don't have a price tag, but it takes time and energy together with money to raise them. Prices, or more precisely shadow prices, are always there. When we feel this way, it doesn't take a complex theoretical apparatus to gain insights into human behavior, the performance of markets, and the evolution of society. Human capital can be defined as the collection of skills and knowledge embedded in people that let them produce valuable goods. Human capital grows when we invest in it, but it also depreciates and becomes obsolete. Although it is often approximated with years of schooling, formal schooling, it is much more than that. It involves our interaction, it involves what we learn in our daily interaction with our parents or our experiences in the school of life. An important part is acquired at work through on-the-job training and learning by doing. When we're sick or in pain, our productivity is diminished. Thus, health is also an essential component of human capital. You may be thinking its definition is too broad or fluid, but the same could be said about non-human regular capital. Yet economists don't hesitate to apply the single concept to things as different as machinery, equipment, real estate, stocks, bonds, art collections, and so on. A recurrent topic in human capital theory is altruism, and it is hard to overstate its centrality. It may be obvious that selfishness governs market transactions. We want to pay less when we go shopping. But altruism governs how we interact with our spouse, with our children, our friends, and neighbors. Since we work in order to make money and free time to spend it the way we want, and that typically means spend it on or with our family and our friends, we could say that the size of the economy governed by altruism is as large as the part governed by selfishness. Human Capital for Humans, the book that I'm pleased to present today, is an introduction to human capital theory, inspired by the doctoral course Gary Becker taught here for decades. In that course, he presented a narrative that moved from personal decisions and the intimacy of the household to markets, the world economy, and the history of humanity. His course was a satisfying intellectual journey. As a student, I felt that economics made sense as a single and coherent body. Simple tools could explain complex patterns within and between motions, as well as humanity's history. Since those days, I have wanted to share those ideas with anyone willing to listen. Now, I can do so with anyone willing to read. Much like Becker's doctoral course, the book weaves together a collection of topics that reflect the main concerns of ordinary people: education, health, marriage, having and raising children, getting a good job, progressing economically. I'm not going to attempt to summarize now what you can find in the book, but I will try to give you a taste, just enough to awaken your curiosity. Siblings account for about half of the inequality we observe in income, in test scores, and also in physical traits such as height. The correlation between the wealth of parents and children is about 0.6, but for adopted children, it's roughly half that. When it comes to physical beauty, it turns out that averageness is attractiveness. Yes, average is beautiful. How do we make sense of these statistical facts? What do these findings tell us about markets or society? Should we do something about them? Human capital theory allows us to interpret this type of information using simple but powerful tools. Consider, for instance, the marriage market. I love that. Can a case be made for polygyny? Who would oppose it? Back in 1908, George Bernard Shaw, the playwright who won both an Oscar and a Nobel Prize, made a rational case for allowing multiple women to marry the same man. That, he argued, would increase competition among males, ultimately benefiting women. Men with lower human capital would be hurt by legalizing polygyny, and that's precisely why they would oppose it. When there are large gender imbalances in the marriage market, one side is bound to get a better deal than the other, like in any other market. Consider England after the First World War, or the United States during the era of mass incarceration of African American men. In both cases, more women were competing for fewer men, and that meant sweeter deals for husbands. A silver lining is that such imbalances also created more opportunities for women in the labor market. Today in the US, 40% more women graduate college than men. Since college graduates are more likely to marry each other, this imbalance is creating a scarcity of college-educated men, giving them great bargaining power and potentially placing a heavier burden on women at home. The tools of human capital theory allow us to analyze these kinds of questions. During my time as a graduate student here, I was awarded the Margaret Reed Dissertation Fellowship. I clearly remember Becker explaining to me who she was. Like any young economist, I was completely uninterested. I was just happy to get funding. It wasn't until I was preparing this book that I returned to her writings. Margaret Reed earned her PhD here in the 1930s and later became a professor in the economics department. Her doctoral dissertation culminated in the book, The Economics of Household Production. Both Gary Becker and Milton Friedman were influenced by Reed's ideas. Household production is part of what makes human capital so consequential. We do not consume goods as we get them from the store. We transform them at home through a coordinated process that involves effort, time, and skills. If you know how to prepare sushi, you might buy seaweed sheets, rice vinegar, fresh wasabi, and so on. Since I don't know how to make sushi, I won't buy such ingredients. An external observer at the grocery store might say that you and I have different preferences. In contrast, someone versed in human capital theory would conclude that the difference may be explained by our skills and our knowledge. Raising children is an enormously complex process. My sons are here, my wife too. It's no exaggeration to say that it is the most challenging project many of us will ever undertake, but it's also the most joyful and rewarding. Parents do what they do out of love. Macroeconomists and financiers talk constantly about the interest rate and how it shapes the economy by affecting the allocation of resources between investment and consumption. Human capitalists talk about parental altruism. Loving children more deeply means sacrificing additional consumption to invest more in them. More investment leads to greater productivity and higher levels of wealth for the next generation. Love of the parental kind is therefore the greatest driver of economic growth. It is the ultimate macroeconomic force. I mean it. Parents invest in their children. Later in life, children may pay them back. The Xiaojing, the Quran, and the Bible all mandate honoring one's parents. From a human capital perspective, following this tenet can increase the size of the economic pie. When parents are confident that their children will take care of them in old age, they're willing to invest more in them. But how can that be achieved? When it comes to caring for their elders, humans are a bit of an anomaly in the natural world. This kind of behavior seems to run counter to evolutionary efficiency, since the resources devoted to our elders could instead be directed toward the success of our children. Yet it is economically efficient. Aided by social institutions such as religion and ethical systems, parents can inculcate guilt in their children, making them more likely to repay their parental investment. A moral obligation thus takes the place of a mutually beneficial financial contract, expanding the possibilities for human capital investment. Now, looking at virtually every family, it is easy to see that siblings are not clones of one another. Earlier I mentioned that they account for roughly half of the inequality we observe in income and test scores. And the popular TV show The Simpsons provides a good illustration. When allocating investment resources between Lisa and Bart, Homer and Marge face a dilemma. Should they invest in the child who's more promising, Lisa, or in the one who may need the investment more, Bart? Whether one of them receives more investment than the other depends on how easily income can be transformed into happiness and how easily investment can be transformed into income. Now, it's important to bring in happiness because, after all, we as parents, we don't want our children to be rich. We want them to be happy. Surely, wealth helps achieve happiness, but the two are not synonymous. If parents could somehow ensure that the abler sibling will take care of the less able one, they can maximize the size of the pie and then split it. They can separate the efficiency problem from the equity concern. This arrangement would benefit both types of children. And in this sense, the family serves as an allegory for society, where progressive tax systems function like inter-sibling transfers. A little known fact is that Milton Friedman wrote his doctoral dissertation on human capital. The work was a collaboration with another economist you might have heard of, Simon Kuznets. Both went on to have great careers as macroeconomists, and both received Nobel Prizes. They studied the returns on human capital investment in 5 professions. 10 years before them, John Raymond Walsh, an economist at Harvard, has done something similar, studying the returns to different levels of education using data he collected by mail. Both studies offered a careful discussion of what could explain the excess returns on human capital investment. The level of agreement between Friedman and Walsh is striking, given that one was known as the ultimate free marketeer, we know who, and the other was a fellow traveler of the Communist Party. Oscar Wilde once said, "A cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." Life is priceless, of course. But what do we do when a person is accidentally killed and her family seeks compensation? This question exemplifies the intersection of the philosophical and the mundane. How much does a person value her own life? The answer can be inferred from how much that same person is willing to sacrifice to live longer, for example, through investments in health. Human capital theory, therefore, provides a way to gauge the statistical value of life. By looking at prices, human capital theory can also shed light on major health issues such as obesity. Suppose we take an occupation that requires similar effort today as it did 100 years ago, such as school teachers. Then consider a staple like bacon. We can't compare how much bacon a school teacher can bring home today versus a century ago for the same effort. What we find is that the price of food has dropped precipitously. If that wasn't enough, at the same time, the price of exercising has gone up. And I don't mean gym membership fees. An hour not spent at the gym is an hour that could be spent streaming enjoyable shows while eating delicious snacks. The fun we forgo when we work out has skyrocketed relative to our great-grandparents. When prices move so drastically in terms of food and the shadow price of working out, behavior inevitably follows. In The Descent of Man, Charles Darwin discussed the trade-off between the quantity and quality of offspring faced by species. Having more of one means sacrificing some of the other. Humans are not exempt from this trade-off. We choose how many children to have and how much to invest in each. We control both their quantity and their quality. In this process, an enormous component of the implicit price is given by foregone earnings. In fact, foregone earnings help explain why fertility has declined despite the fact that having and raising children has become safer and easier than ever before. Not less important, this framework helps explain why fertility started falling decades before the advent of modern birth control methods. Since the time of Socrates, thinkers have discussed the division of labor. Arguably, the most dramatic change in this regard has occurred in recent generations, as women enter the labor market en masse. For thousands of generations, sexual dimorphism, big word, the fact that males and females have different biological features and functions created natural advantages for specialization. Men can neither give birth nor breastfeed. That difference alone could have triggered a division of labor along gender lines. In the past, when women were pregnant or breastfeeding for a substantial portion of their adult lives, it made economic sense for them to be homemakers, while men were breadwinners. The invention and proliferation of modern household appliances, along with gas and electricity, made possible the takeoff of female participation in the workforce. These goods and services save time, allowing women to take jobs outside the home. Meanwhile, as their human capital increased, thanks to the expansion of public education, women found it increasingly appealing to join the labor force and leave the household behind. That, in turn, created even greater demand for time-saving appliances. What for generations have operated as a reasonably efficient rule for organizing household production and market activities became outdated. Now that women participate in virtually every field, we observe a drastic drop in the labor force participation after they have their first child, something men don't experience. This phenomenon has been dubbed the child penalty. However, mothers with more education and higher income tend to spend more time on childcare activities and out of the labor force after that child is born. Based on such evidence, it seems that rather than a penalty, this may be more of a privilege. parents understand the benefits of spending quality time and engaging with their children, particularly during early childhood. A frequently overlooked form of human capital is our consumption history. What we've consumed in the past largely shapes what we enjoy in the present, from orange juice to jazz music. This consumption capital can be deliberately accumulated. You can get better at enjoying things, and that's part of improving your household production. It can also be developed haphazardly, as in the sports teams we happen to support. This simple idea may help explain further decreases in fertility rates. Think about how often people were intensely interacting with babies within their families a century ago versus today. If past exposure to babies acts as a complement to having our own babies, then such exposure is a form of consumption capital. When others choose to have fewer children, they reduce the exposure of their relatives, friends, and peers, creating a downward push on fertility through a feedback loop. I've touched on a variety of topics to give you a sense of the breadth and depth of human capital theory, and I'd like to close by turning to history. It is safe to say that in the distant past, there was no real concept of income growth. We can find discussions of wealth and poverty, but these refer to absolute values, not sustained changes over time. If anything, there's evidence of permanent stagnation. In his Meditations, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius spoke of the uniformity that prevails in all things which have been and all that will be. Back then, children were expected to live in the same conditions as their parents and grandparents. In one word, life was inalterable. Now we know that that is not the case. Over the past few hundred years, change has been the only constant. Naturally, we expect that process to continue. To use the words of John Maynard Keynes, we live in a time of progressive, violent change. The natural question is, what caused that dramatic break in the centuries-long trend of virtually no growth? The short answer is a human capital revolution. When the human capital of one generation is small, the benefits of devoting resources to the learning of the next generation are modest. That's because today's human capital is an input in the production of tomorrow's. This propagation property is quite special. The number of microwave ovens in use today has no bearing on the production cost of new ones. The ovens already owned by millions of households are not part of the production process of new ovens. But that is not the case with human capital. Human capital of parents and teachers is an essential input in producing the human capital of children. The more human capital currently available, the cheaper it is to produce new human capital, and a corollary follows. Societies with high levels of human capital have stronger incentives to invest in more of it than societies with low levels. The bang for the buck is greater, although there is more human capital. Natural forces and luck shape what we observe over time. The original condition of humanity was precarious, barely subsisting. At various points in time and space, positive shocks, such as several years of good crops, led to more abundant resources, allowing societies to invest in the arts and sciences. If those shocks were large and sustained, a class of educated people could emerge, leading to the creation, accumulation, and transmission of knowledge. But that class had to be large enough to make further investment in human capital worthwhile. Otherwise, society would fail to maintain its stock, and time would eventually erase the gains. Instead of sustained growth, such economy would fall back to the bottom of the trap. That is how the civilizations studied in this institute appear from Sci Hall, just across the promenade, where the Department of Economics sits. The collapse of these civilizations over 3,000 years ago wasn't unique. As historian Eric Klein writes, it is a cycle that the world has seen time and again, the rise and fall of empires. Human capital theory offers a simple way to make sense of this rise and fall process. Although positive events may have helped ancient civilizations develop some human capital, they didn't reach the critical threshold that would lower the investment costs enough to sustain continual growth. Inventions and discoveries can help societies cross that threshold. Think, for instance, of the movable type printing press. Before its invention, the cost of producing books was prohibitively high. It took 3 years for a scribe to produce 1 copy of the Bible. In the same period, Gutenberg could produce 270. The crucial point here is not just the increase in efficiency, but the expansion in the availability of books. Without them, learning to read was a useless endeavor. Books made it possible to store knowledge for later consultation and to share ideas, inventions, and discoveries with audiences well beyond classrooms and lecture halls. Economic historians estimate that book production in Western Europe during the 6th and 7th centuries was around 120 books per year. By 1790, it had risen to roughly 20 million. If you have to name a single catalyst for the human capital revolution that began a few centuries ago, the best candidate would be expensive books. They help humanity cross the critical threshold, opening the door to what we now call modernity. I've given you a sense of the power and beauty of human capital theory, perhaps enough to leave you curious for more. There is much to learn by looking back, but there's also an exciting frontier ahead. Human capital theory and the Chicago approach to economics remain alive. Their preservation and their evolution now lie in the hands of new generations. Hopefully, human capital for humans can help stimulate them. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I found this book absolutely fascinating. Yeah, let's make sure.
Can you hear me?
On here?
Excellent.
Okay, great. Human capital is one of those phrases that economists throw around that is a bit chilly. I wonder why you felt it needed a human interpretation.
That's a great question. I think that people throw around the term Homo economicus and the idea that economists perceive humans in a way that is not actually human. And so the title kind of plays with that notion. Human capital is all about humans. So the book is for humans, but the concept should be also directed to humans. And economists should embrace the humanity of people. Now, economists have been doing that forever and ever. It's just a small group of economists don't represent that in the work. And unfortunately, that's where people pick. The people pick those examples to say, hey, look at how economists represent individuals. Whereas you have Adam Smith and Alfred Marshall and a lot of big names saying, no, that's not how we think about people. We recognize the humanity of people, their fallibility, their recklessness, and so on. And that's how the people tend to pick and then try to criticize economists and the economic discipline based on that. So I think that's the nature of that humans part.
Yeah, I mean, your title you could arguably say that you're saying that economists are missing the point.
Some there. Absolutely, yes.
So you take this big economic concept and apply it to things, as you've been talking about, like parenting, marriage, health. Why bring economics into those personal spaces? And what, if anything, surprised you as you were doing that?
Well, I think economists have something different to say about why people do what they do and whether something can be done to improve society, for instance. You have disciplines like the hard sciences, chemistry and physics, where they would argue, people in those disciplines would argue that people do what they do because of chemical reactions in the brains, right? There's just cause and effect, no free will even, right? Some people say in theology might say, well, there's a supreme being. We do what we do because there's a supreme being who wants us to do that. In psychology, somebody might say, well, don't fool yourself that way. It's all the result of your childhood trauma. You were mistreated in high school, picked on and bullied. That's why you do what you do. Right. In biology, what they say is the result of evolutionary efficiency. We respond the way we respond because that's evolutionary efficiency. Economists take a different approach and say, look, this is what we like. This is what is affordable. And among what's affordable, we choose that. And here the concepts that become key are prices. Prices generally understood that involve what you paid when you work, and therefore encompass income. And I think that provides, unlike other sciences or disciplines, if I may say, a very simple framework to understand actions. If you can understand economics with a few pages in the right book, and I don't think you can say the same about most other disciplines. So I think that's why it's the most popular social science. The bang for the buck, you learn a little and you can explain a lot. That's what makes it very appealing. So that's, I think, why it's worth using it to try to understand pretty much everything or anything that humans do.
One of the concepts that I really held on to in reading the book was this idea of depreciation. Now, when I think of depreciation, I think of my car. As soon as you drive it off the lot, right? Which is why you should never buy a new car. But you talk about depreciation of us.
Right.
And as I age, I can definitely relate to that. What does that look like in everyday life if our human capital is depreciating? Explain that for us.
Well, there are probably, I would explain it in two ways. One way is a simple comparison of when people in different sectors of niches peak. I love to use the example of female gymnasts. The elite female gymnasts, get their gold medals as teenagers. If you look at marathoners, right, long distance running, the top performers are in their early 30s. And if you look at Oscar-nominated directors, they're in the 50s, like around 50. So I take that to mean different skills peak at different times because those skills depreciate at different rates. So in a way, what this indicates is that you have to lean towards the things where you say you're going to get more from your skills and your knowledge as you age. Of course, I don't expect it to start to take up gymnastics now, but maybe movie. So that's one point. And the other is that unlike machinery and equipment, humans can prevent depreciation by using more their skills and their knowledge. So a machine, you use it more and it wears down and stops working. Your car, you use it more and it becomes less valuable. If you learn French in high school and you keep using it, guess what? You're going to be in a better position than if you stopped using it. The same goes for physical activity and so on. So that's a very specific property of human capital. You can delay, you can reduce the depreciation by actually using. It's like a use it or lose it type of situation.
So given that, if we accept that human capital depreciates, what does policy look like around that? You talk about preventive health investment in the book, retraining subsidies. Is that something that that a government could look at to help us with this? Universal early childhood education. How could policymakers look at this human capital idea and build around it?
Right. So definitely human capital investment. I mean, it's no coincidence that everywhere in the world you look, or almost everywhere, you're going to find free public education at the basic level. And I think that's no coincidence. It doesn't really matter what type of government you have, what type of society. That seems to be something everybody agrees on. And I think the reason for that is the fact that it's worth investing in it, and you cannot leave it to parents to make that decision because many of them are going to be constrained. They're going to be poor. They're not going to have the resources to do it. But society is going to be better off if the next generation has more human capital. So it's a good investment at a society level, at least at the basic level. Then after that, it becomes an issue as discussing Lisa and Bart of efficiency versus equity. Now, a society may say, shouldn't we be investing more on the smart people that can actually come up with the best ideas later? Alfred Marshall made a case for that, and he said, look, if we pay the education of a whole town, and one of those individuals comes up with a good idea like Bessemer's method to produce steel, that would be fantastic because his invention saved the work of 100,000 people. So he was big in that kind of idea, subsidizing education because of that kind of like buying lottery tickets. But then again, that investment has an opportunity cost. And then we have here at the University of Chicago, James Heckman, who has done a lot of studies about the rates of return investing in early childhood. So there's it's a portfolio problem. And I think that's the right way to approach. We want to invest in early childhood education. I mentioned that this is not a situation where we're just maximizing productivity. Sometimes it's worth investing in people, say, with disabilities. Not because we're going to get a great bang for the buck in terms of productivity, but because those people matter and the fact that they could become financially independent might be a great deal for society. We value that. So it's a portfolio problem, and it's important for that problem, to solve that problem, to get good measures of what the return is at different points of the distribution of talent or the distribution of age or the distribution of any characteristic. Yeah. I hope that helps. I could talk about this for hours, and I was like 22 hours without stop.
I think that was a good summation. Unless we have 22 hours?
Wait, that was...
10? No. Okay.
I don't.
I want to turn to a topic that is in the headlines these days a lot, and you and I were talking earlier, and you said you get a lot of questions about this, but I'm going to give you some more. You seem pretty optimistic about AI, and I would argue that that is certainly not the norm these days unless you are NVIDIA today with a market cap of $5 trillion. You write about how you think technology might actually raise the value of human skills instead of replacing them. Can you walk us through how that is?
So, again, you're right. I get this question more and more frequently. I think there are two approaches. The one would be like the immediate one, and the other is like almost like the sci-fi version of the question. The more immediate one, I think that the advent of AI looks a lot like previous quote-unquote revolutions that we've experienced. The mechanization of agriculture was a huge deal. People don't look at that, don't think about, 98% of farm agricultural workers were displaced because you only needed a little bit of pesticide, fertilizers, and a tractor, and then everybody was quote-unquote unemployed. But that process made possible the manufacturing boom, because those were the individuals that went to cities, that joined production lines, and made the manufacturers that we enjoy today possible. And then there was an automation revolution. Robots, production lines, and so on made so much labor not necessary. And that created another boom, the service boom. And now what we're seeing is that not mechanization or automation, but algorithmization of services. And then there's going to be the freeing of human capital to go to different sectors. The problem is, looking back is very clear. We went from agriculture to manufacturing to services, and we're going to be like, well, we don't know what's next. Well, really people did when we were back then. So they were scared, freaking out, thinking what's going to happen. So if history serves a little bit as a model, it means that the skills are going to be relocated. They're going to go somewhere else. We're going to make new sectors that we cannot imagine now. In the book, I invite the reader to think what our great-great-grandparents would think if you try to explain what Apple does, or NVIDIA, or whatever.
I still can't explain what NVIDIA does.
So now imagine your great-great-grandchild coming to you and telling you, well, I'm very happy I just got a job at this sector. You're going to be like, I don't understand what you do.
Yeah.
What do you mean by cosmic vibes or whatever? I'm just making that up. You know what I mean? Yeah. So now I mentioned the sci-fi version of this because, again, some people push and say, but what about the singularity, Pablo? What do you think is going to happen? I have a short answer because I perfected it. There are pretty much two scenarios. Either we coexist peacefully with AI, this supreme being smarter than us, or we have an adversarial relationship. In this case, we better invest a lot in our human capital because we're never to fight, right? In the coexistence scenario, there are two variations of this. Either we work for them or we ignore them, or they ignore us. Like Dr. Manhattan and the Watchmen, like they're so smart, they're like, they don't bother dealing with us. In that case, we better invest in human capital because we're gonna be like left to our own. If we work for them, I have an analogy. I know of incredibly intelligent beings that coexist with us. They're called corporations, organizations, and so on. They're a collection of brains, much more intelligent than each of us individually, and they actually compensate us for using our skills. So if a super intelligent AI that walks the earth happens to occur and you observe, then investing in human capital would also be a strong way to go. It would be my strong recommendation. So either way, in this kind of apocalyptic sci-fi scenarios, human capital is still important, and investing in it will be relevant.
Unless they turn on us and obliterate us.
Right.
It's all over anyway, so. I think there's also a lot of anxiety about people being left behind in any revolution, certainly the tech revolution and AI specifically. Do you think that human capital theory gives us a roadmap for helping workers keep up? Assuming that we want to get along with them?
I think that I don't know if I would call it a roadmap, but it gives us a framework. And what we know is that it is very dangerous to try to protect sectors that are bound to disappear. It's very inefficient. It's not necessarily a good idea. It's very difficult to guess what's going to happen and try to be a step ahead. So if you're a government and say, hey, I think that all these people should move to this other sector that I'm going to come up with, I think there's no good track record for that kind of policy. So I think what matters is flexibility. And again, as we move along, it's important to try to adjust, adapt curriculum in schools. And that's happening. I mean, right now, we at a university like Chicago, we're thinking all the time, every quarter we get emails. What is our AI policy? What are we doing about it? And how, and that's an ongoing process. It would be terrible to have somebody say, you guys should do this. Well, we're trying to figure out, who knows why you would implement that strategy. So I think that's the beauty of having a market where many people are going to try to deal with this issue in different ways. And we hope to learn from that and adopt those things that seem to work best.
One thing I've learned in doing this podcast is that economists are all about numbers, right? It's pretty obvious. But measurement is still a bit of an Achilles heel for human capital research. How do you capture the kinds of skills that don't show up in conventional databases when you're talking about the value of that human capital?
Well, I mean, it's not easy, but if there's a skill that is valuable, I believe it's going to show up in the observable part of the economy.
Yeah.
So sometimes we find that people are willing, for instance, to work at places where they find meaning for a lower wage than at places where they think there's no meaning. And that kind of variation is what allows to measure how important for a person it could be to be at a job where there's meaning. And I think that's doable. And some people in our department have attempted those kinds of comparisons. And I think it actually conforms with what would be your expectation. Like, if you like what you do, you're actually willing to do it for a little less or a lot less than what you will have to be paid to do something you don't like. So, and sometimes that is just not convenience, but it's actually purpose, meaning. People love that. People love to have purpose, whatever that means. And sometimes we can actually not see it, but figure it out indirectly. I mean, I think there are plenty of stories of people that say, for instance, value independence. And they say, I prefer to be my own boss, not make a lot of money, but I know that it's me who's on top and not having to take orders. And you can figure out what is the value of independence, what is the value of other job conditions, but also personal attributes.
I'm curious whether writing this book has changed the way you think about your own time, how you spend it, what you learn, who you invest in.
I think there's something I definitely learned, and I think the overarching lesson is that I want to read more about what economists from yesteryear wrote. I found there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of great ideas that people just don't care to read. I'm going to give you an example. The Nobel Prize in economics was given a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about creative destruction. Mm-hmm. And if you say creative destruction, people roll their eyes and will say, "Oh, Schumpeter, I know, new firms, what ifs." But if you read Schumpeter, there's a lot of gold nuggets of wisdom in there. You can read it, and he discusses issues that are incredibly relevant these days. And I love doing that. And I did not know it was so much fun to read it. And it's very well written, unlike modern economics that is incomprehensible. So that's one. And I think the other is we have to do a better job explaining concepts. You know, we believe we get one concept, but when we have to break it down, explain it without equations and graphs, turns out that you really did not know what you were doing exactly. And to me, that was the one of the two main lessons of this project.
What are you hoping this book does for readers? You have people who certainly don't think about themselves as human capital. You have people who do think of themselves as human capital, probably a lot of economists in our audience today, or will after reading the book. How are they different? How do they go about living their lives differently, whether they think about themselves that way or not?
Well, I think people don't have to see themselves as human capital to actually behave like, these models describe. I think that's the beauty of economics. At least good economists never claim that you need to know economics to be an economic entity. And so, but I think that when people read it, number one, it can be entertaining. I think I felt that when I was exposed to these ideas, and I liked it, particularly when it comes to big pictures, like in understanding markets and big picture patterns, like fertility, why fertility dropped, what happened with these technological revolutions that I was talking about, what happens in the marriage market, who gets the bargaining power, and so on. So just satisfying that intellectual curiosity is good. We like that. Now, I think that for people that are interested in human beings, that's just an entertaining type of reading. But I think anybody in the social sciences, by looking at these, can get a good grasp of how economists look at things. You see, there's a Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, but there's a Council of Sociological Advisors or Psychological Advisors or Anthropological Advisors. And I think the reason why is the power of economic thinking. So the book, it's kind of like a window into how economists perceive how people behave, and then that connects to policies that you've seen left and right. Now, that is something that everybody agrees with the framework, but it's a starting point. It's a pretty good starting point. Let me go back a little bit to Gary Becker. When he started discussing these issues, there was really not much of a framework. People just thought, well, there's marriage, and marriage happens. And what he did was provide a framework to say, let's talk about it in terms of incentives, let's talk about it in terms of efficiency, and see what it takes us. And then people might refine that, try to refute it, and so on. The same goes with thinking of people as capital and investment and getting a return, and there being a rate of depreciation and obsolescence, and so on. So I think that's the beauty. It's a framework that allows us to discuss these issues in a nice place where we can actually communicate and understand each other. So not everybody has to agree with that, But I think even if you're an anthropologist or a sociologist or a psychologist, there's a lot in there. Just like I like to read psychology. I like to read how they think. And sometimes I'm like, oh, this makes a ton of sense. I think this is the kind of book that would cross the other way.
Well, speaking of Gary Becker, I want to hear a bit more about your experience with him as such a significant influence in your life, clearly. Can you talk to us about the man, the myth, the legend, what he was like as a teacher, as a mentor? What was it about his class that so captivated you and kept you coming back for more? Because you write about that early in the book.
I think he was one of the few people that I've known in academia that never, that I can recall, mentioned the word publication. Never mentioned whether this idea was publishable, whether it did belong to the top 5 journals, or whether this is going to get you tenure or a teaching job. He was 112% about the idea. So sitting with him to discuss anything and everything was about trying to learn something new, trying to get things right. And he was also probably the most generous person with his time and his wisdom. He would give 15-minute slots, but he would give those slots. And I visited his office many times with some weird ideas. And I have one anecdote where I asked him, I thought I wanted to measure the value people place on sitting farther away from other people or at the movies, right? Let's imagine that this is the movies, the screen is over there, and there are empty seats here, and you sit there. And I'm like, okay, this is the best row to sit, but I don't want to sit too close to you because it's weird, but I do want to sit closer to the middle. So what's the value that I place on, say, my business? How do I trade off?
Place a very high value on that.
Well, some people do. Some people do. So I kind of convinced him, and I said, I cannot use a video recorder, which would be ideal, because I wanted to sit here at Doc Films, the theater, the movie theater, how everybody sat before the movie was about to start. I explained to him all this. I went to the, the ethical review board, the IRB board here. They said, no way, you're not going to record people sitting in the movie theater, no way. Because I needed to know who was the who and so on. So I said, I know how to do it. I just need 6 research assistants to sit all over the auditorium and record in these pre-printed maps. And then I had a code to say these people come together, this meal, and then the time at which they were sitting, because that was key. Like, it was like recording everything that we did in the video. So he said, okay, I'll give you money to do that. So I went and got the arrays and did this for a week, and it was fantastic. I was there at Doc Film, seeing how everything worked. I got the data, coded it, ran my regressions, came to his office super happy because I had a way to trade these 2 things off. And he said, fantastic. Now what? I was like, well, and he asked me, why is this relevant? That was always his question, why this is relevant. And I couldn't answer that question. And I believe that was, instead of teaching me the hard way something, he taught me the soft way. He actually let me go all the way wrong wild with this idea, and then figure out, well, maybe, yeah, I didn't have an idea why this was relevant. I tried, but in the end, that went to the file cabinet of nothing. Nothing's going to come out of here. So, but I think that illustrates in a way, he took seriously the question, but he also was willing to hear the wildest ideas. And he would debate them. He was not soft in the sense of he would give free passes. And I think that's a lesson. I mean, I think, honestly, every social science researcher should aspire to be like him. All about, knowledge, testing, being skeptical, being curious, and so on.
I love that. All right, well, anyone familiar with the podcast knows that we do a lightning round at the end of every episode. These are questions for you to answer very quickly, if you will. First of all, what books are you reading right now, or would you recommend, besides your own?
The Extended Phenotype by Richard Dawkins.
Oh, why?
I think it's fantastic. I love it, and I think it explains lots of things related to human capital.
There you go. We usually ask what course changed your life as a student, but I think we've established that today, so we'll skip that one. So finally, Pablo, if you had to make a pie with the current contents of your kitchen, what would it be?
It will be a Basque cheesecake.
Oh, good answer. I'll be over later.
I think I have everything I need, right? Yes.
All right, well, thank you. That was fantastic.